We're getting ready to begin again. If we can have you come and sit down. Paula is eager and ready to start her discussion, her comments. Once again, what we're going to do at the end of the conference here at this venue is we're going to go up to Haynes Hall at the Chicano Studies Research Center on the first floor of Haynes Hall. We have a display in the corridor and inside the Chicano Studies Research Center library. And we also have a display in the conference room. Once again, the display in the corridor is on, thematically is on Sal Castro, and also efforts to reinstate Sal Castro after he was removed from his teaching position and not allowed in the classroom. Then when you enter the library, there is a wall dedicated to the 1968 Roosevelt walkouts. And the question was posed to me is, why the emphasis on Roosevelt High School? Well, two reasons. One, that a prominent UCLA alumni took those pictures in 1968, and she's with us today. She's one of our featured photographers, Deborah Weber. And the other reason those were curated as part of the display is because I graduated from Roosevelt High School. And I met a couple of students from Roosevelt High School. There he is. Show your colors. There he is, right there. Yeah. Inside the library, we will have the 68 walkouts at Roosevelt. Then we'll have an example of the sit-ins. Several photos taken of the sit-in at LA Unified School District board offices. And there's several of those images includes not only students from the high schools, but also UMA students that were participating in the sit-in. One of whom was Luis Arroyo, who was a chairman of UMAS a little bit later. Then we have some images of the East L.A. 13, those that were arrested. And the trumped-up charges were such that if they had been convicted, they could have gone to prison for life, over 60 years. Those images are important, and there's a striking image of them in court. You'll see Moctesuma, Esparza, there's Sal Castro sitting there as those that are being charged. And it didn't look like they were worried. Moctesuma, it looked like you were in a happy place. They were talking to one another, and I think they were, motivating each other, but it certainly didn't look like they were in a dire situation. So you've got to look at those images, and they represent a part of our history. It's part of our history. And now we're going to go have a talk by one of our historical icons, one of the young women that led the movement in '68, to have the students walk out and dramatize the malfunctioning schools that we had. Paula Crisostomo.
$50 years. Oh my God. Thank you, Charlotte. So it was 50 years ago this week when I was a senior at Lincoln High School in Northeast Los Angeles that I helped to organize and lead a protest that to this day remains the largest organized demonstration of high school students in the country. And served as a potent sign that things would never be the same for the Chicano community. In March 1968, thousands of Chicano students in East L.A. staged a peaceful walkout. Thousands more students across the city walked out of their classrooms in support of our cause. We were successful at shutting down the schools for a week, but more importantly, for shining the spotlight on the deplorable quality of education and the racist treatment that we were subjected to. The walkouts exploded after weeks of planning by college and high school students. The student walkouts stunned the city and gained national attention. It was another catalytic spark that helped ignite what came to be known as the movimiento, the Chicano movement for civil rights and dignity. Exciting times. The roots of the walkouts were in the social and cultural experiences of living in Los Angeles for generations, deteriorating schools and educational systems and policies that were hostile to working class communities and peoples of color, oppressive police occupation of our neighborhoods, a growing sense that we knew we had to stand up to discrimination and oppression. All of these factors and more contributed to the volcanic social explosion that characterized the East L.A. walkouts. And it is hard for me to believe that it's been 50 years since those heady and transformative days. In 1965, the world was changing. Socio-political ideology was taking root and evolving, and so was I. I was 15 years old. I was a sophomore at Lincoln. Student population at that time was predominantly Mexican. Lincoln was an older school. It was originally built in 1878 and then rebuilt after the 1933 earthquake. And like all the other East Side schools, the physical conditions were plain enough for everyone to see. Crumbling paint and crumbling foundations. Fortunately, that year, I was enrolled in a social studies class taught by Sal Castro, whom I had never had for a class before. In his own way, Mr. Castro was an innovator. He was someone who was devoted to nurturing the intellectual potential of his students. He peppered his class lectures with passion, humor, and anecdotal stories. And he wasn't shy about urging Chicano students to learn their history and be proud of their Mexican historical and cultural legacy. There were other teachers who referred to us as lazy Mexicans and stupid wedpecks. I had a geometry teacher who told me that I would never go to college because I would probably be pregnant the summer after I graduated. And I was in the college prep track. Now this was, of course, was during the infamous tracking system. College prep was the track students with consistently good grades were put into. A small fraction of the students were in the college prep track, meaning they had a chance to take algebra or geometry instead of basic math, or to take American literature and expository writing instead of English and grammar. We were perceived as the good kids. But the vast majority of students were tracked into what was euphemistically called an industrial arts pathway. Teachers and administrators had such low expectations of us that the majority of the kids were relegated to classes such as homemaking and auto mechanics. At Lincoln, the girls were usually assigned to cosmetology, and the girls at Roosevelt had something called power sewing, while woodshop and auto mechanics were what boys were assigned to. You see, we were being trained to use our hands so that when we got pushed out of school, or if we did graduate, we were qualified to work in the factories, the fields, or join the military. Now, of course, nothing's wrong with offering any of those classes, but we were never given the choice. As our consciousness was being raised, we looked around and took note of what was going on around us. When I helped to lead the walkouts, I was a 17-year-old girl from a family of 8 children. I grew up in public housing, the projects. Ramona Gardens, the housing complex I lived in, was billed as a slum clearance and low-rent housing project. In the 1960s, the Los Angeles Police Department called it the epicenter of illegal drug activity in all of Southern California. Sometimes I had to endure slurs from students who mumbled mockingly that I lived in the projects. Now, those snide comments didn't contribute to self-esteem. And as the oldest girl, I had a lot of responsibilities at home, so that I became the assistant mother. My father was a janitor, and my mom stayed at home and became a community activist. Besides being a student and helping out at home, I also had a part-time job in the evenings and on the weekends because my family needed the money I was able to earn. All of these experiences welled up inside of me as the year 1968 and the walkouts beckoned on the horizon. Another key milestone in my social and intellectual evolution was my participation in the Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference. Sal Castro was a volunteer, and he encouraged me to sign up to go. I first attended in 1967 when I was 16. It was organized by the Los Angeles Community Human Relations Commission in 1963. The idea was to expose students from the inner city to people and ideas devoted to social change. It was a transformative experience for me and lots of other students. The organizers of the conference were hoping to develop leadership among the students, and it was very valuable. Many of the walkout leaders, both high school and college students, participated in this innovative weekend experience. One of the things that developed from the conference was that a group of students formed an organization called the Young Citizens for Community Action, or YCCA, which was then changed to Young Chicanos for Community Action, and then changed to the Brown Berets. We were a small group of students that wanted to work to better their community. The college students organized and ran the meetings. We talked about the common challenges we faced: police brutality, the growing opposition to the Vietnam War, the growing farm worker movement, and the insensitivity of policies at our schools. Those early political discussions continued throughout much of my life, as my peers and I solved the problems of the world. I listened and learned from my peers and mentors. Many times our discussions would last long into the night. It was eye-opening for me to meet so many like-minded students. The college students were very encouraging to us about pursuing higher education and about getting actively involved in issues confronting our communities. YCCA met at local parks and at the Church of the Epiphany, an Episcopal church in Lincoln Heights that was committed to community activism. A remarkable priest named Father John Luce headed its community outreach. All of us students will be eternally grateful to Father Luce for his support and encouragement. Now, as we discussed a number of issues, we collectively developed a sense that we had to do something about how we were treated in school. By this time, we had coalesced with students from all of the schools: Lincoln, Wilson, Belmont, Garfield, and Roosevelt. Each school had its own strike committee that would meet separately from the larger coalition meetings. And at those meetings, Sal began to encourage us to focus on the need to improve the educational experience at the East Side high schools. So guided by the college students, we developed a process which began with surveying other students. A basic survey regarding the student school experience was developed and distributed. Approximately 3,000 high school students completed our survey. We were data-driven even then. So the results were tabulated, and from that, a list of demands were made. Then, with the guidance of Mr. Castro and the college students, we went through the process of informing those in authority of our findings and our needs. We knew we had to make our grievances known. We talked and met with parents, teachers, administrators, and principals. We met with community leaders, community organizations, and elected officials. We were patronized, belittled, and outright ignored. In 1967, Julian Nava, a college history professor, announced his candidacy for the Los Angeles School Board. Nava was the first Latino candidate for the Los Angeles Board of Education in contemporary times. YCCA quickly volunteered to work on his campaign. We thought that he could be very helpful to our success in getting our demands met. I was only 16 years old. I was too young to vote, but I could speak to voters about the importance of voting for Julian. So I phone banked and I walked precincts. Julian won the election, but we soon learned that his lone voice and lone vote were not enough. We knew that we had to do something. We had to stage some kind of dramatic event, and that this event had to be big enough to attract major media attention. Now, knowing that the school received funds from the state for each student in attendance, we knew that we would really get them to take notice of us if we hit them in their wallet. If students weren't in the classroom when roll call was taken, the local funds would take a hit, and the school authorities would have to take notice of our activism. The idea of Walkout started to germinate. But the Walkout was not our first step. It was absolutely our last. And it wasn't a surprise. We were telling everyone. But nobody expected us to actually do it. So people knew about the problems we faced, but no one wanted to take action until 1968, when a bunch of high school and college students led by one brave teacher, decided it was time and assumed the leadership. Now, the late 60s were a period of empowerment for large sectors of U.S. society. It was a time of profound, intense social and political activity whose impact was felt in almost every facet of society and that changed the course of this nation. In particular, 1968 was the year of the police riots at the Chicago Democratic Convention, and it was the year of the assassinations of Reverend Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. It was the year of widespread student protest in France and in Mexico City. Opposition to the Vietnam War was growing, especially in our community, as we witnessed a disproportionate number of Chicanos being sent to Vietnam, only to come home in body bags. This was the period of the civil rights movement and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And we were absolutely inspired by all of it. It was within this overall context that momentum for a dramatic event at the East Side High Schools accelerated. And Sal Castro was by our side through all of it. I became one of the point persons for the planning of the walkouts, while the college students became increasingly involved. They were a bit more sophisticated about these things than we high school students were. The fact is, I was extremely politically unsophisticated and naive, as were the rest of us high school students. But we were committed, we were determined, and we were eager to do what was necessary. We learned quickly that, despite our best intentions, change wouldn't come overnight. But we had to take a stand, and we had to start somewhere, and the walkouts would be a catalyst for change, beginning with the schools. We high school and college students organized ourselves, and we became the organizing engine for the strategic planning of the walkouts. It was decided that we would shut down the 5 East L.A. schools during the first week of March. Sal Castro remained our chief motivator and advisor. Back then, I just seemed to be caught up in the flow of rushing activity. It was a heady time, and again, it's hard for me to believe that it's been 50 long years since those exciting days. I found myself attending meetings night after night. Along with the endless meetings with other students, we also attended community meetings seeking the support of concerned adults. I remember going to a community meeting in City Terrace with Vicki Castro. Vicki was one of our college student mentors, and she was a member of YCCA. The City Terrace Coordinating Council called an all-community meeting in order to discuss the student walkouts and whether their organization should support our efforts. The large meeting room was packed when we arrived. Vicki and I entered the vocal, boisterous, emotional meeting from an open door in the back of the room. We found some seats in the back, sat and listened. We knew we were not getting their support based on the discussion. It was announced that a petition was being circulated. The audience was encouraged to sign the petition that explained that as a resident of East Los Angeles and as parents of students in LAUSD, they did not support the student walkout effort. The signed petition was going to be presented to the Board of Education. Well, the petition reached our row, and it was in our hands. We made eye contact and didn't say a word. And then, with that signed document in our hand, we quietly stood up and exited the building from the same open door We entered. We hurriedly got into Vicky's little gold Corvair and quickly drove away giggling. Grassroots organizing at its finest. Organizing was taking place by the high school students, the college students, and the support of adults, the few parents, clergy, and other community leaders. And all of us were being advised by Sal Castro. While the students strategized how to encourage other students to join us in walking out, the adults were focused on identifying elected officials who would publicly endorse the walkouts. A public statement from any of them would legitimize our cause and demonstrate to parents the necessity of our actions, making it easier for students to participate in the walkouts. No one was willing to support us publicly until one day we were all at a rally in East L.A. and Sal called us around him. U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy was coming to California to meet with Cesar Chavez while he ended his first fast. Dionisio Morales of the Mexican American Opportunity Foundation had arranged for Kennedy to stop in LA for a short period to meet with us. So I climbed into a car along with several other students, and we were driven to a small private terminal. I had never been to an airport before, so I had no clue where I was. As we waited in a small building that had floor-to-ceiling windows, we saw a small plane approaching, and our eyes were fixed on that small plane. Robert Kennedy stepped out of the plane, followed by a few men. He waved to us and smiled broadly as he descended the stairs. We were all very excited. We watched him walk down the stairs and then walk toward us. As he got closer, we noticed that he was wearing a farm worker's button on his lapel. He entered the building, approached us, and shook hands with each of us. We were shown into a small private conference room. Kennedy told us that he supported our efforts for educational justice, and he congratulated us on our activism. He also encouraged us to continue the struggle. He asked us a few questions, then apologized for having to leave. The entire encounter probably took about an hour. Sal had asked a teacher friend who was at the rally to go along with us because he had a camera. So we all posed for a group shot. Sal received a telegram of support from Kennedy several weeks later. So we were finally able to get the public endorsement of a national, well-known, and well-respected politician. Yet the local news media refused to acknowledge it. La Raza was the only newspaper that printed the group photograph. La Raza supported the efforts of the students, while conservative teachers, news reporters, and the community kept accusing us of being led around by outside agitators. So with tongue-in-cheek, La Raza printed the photo of Robert Kennedy and the students, along with the headline, "Bobby Kennedy joins Student Blowout Committee." Outside agitator? Raising awareness and educating our peers was also part of our organizing strategy, as we were adamant that students know what the issues were. We made flyers detailing the conditions of our schools and the racist attitudes we faced. Several of us wrote articles for Chicano Student Movement, which was another community newspaper. These would be distributed on our school campuses and in public spaces where local teens were known to gather. Whittier Boulevard was a main business thoroughfare in East Los Angeles. It was also a very popular street that attracted Chicano youth from all over the region to cruise on Friday and Saturday nights. We would stand on the curb holding the flyers and newspapers. And as these cars full of Chicanos and Chicanas slowed and stopped due to the traffic, we would step into the street and walk from car to car to hand out our literature to the car's passengers. Now, as news spread about our effort, we were invited to speak at meetings and rallies in other parts of the city. We also did radio and television interviews at local stations whose hosts were sympathetic to our cause. We were steadily educating the community, building support, and creating a movement. Meanwhile, I was struggling to do well in school in my senior year, working part-time, meeting my household obligations, and of course, attending the endless meetings. It was wearing me out. My father, who was always conscious about the need to bring in money for the family, kept an eye on my earnings. There was some flexibility in the job I had, and you could opt out of assignments. So, in order to keep up with everything, especially the organizing activities and strategy meetings, I would skip work. The problem was that the fewer days I worked, the smaller my paychecks were. My father would take note of the diminishing amounts in my paycheck, and he wasn't pleased. And he was also worried that, with all that I was doing, I might not graduate. It was a very stressful time for me. And the stress increased with the mysterious late-night telephone calls to our house. People would call late at night and angrily ask my parents how they could possibly allow their daughter to hang out with communists and rabble-rousers. What kind of parents were they? My mother, who had always been a rock of encouragement to me, was now worried about my activism. She was concerned for my safety. But I was committed to what I was doing. As we planned for the walkouts, the harsh realities of the immediate world around me reminded me of the reasons I was doing what I was doing. 3 short years before the walkouts, we were stunned by the events of the so-called Watts riot. Images of cops beating people in the streets were still with me, and I didn't have to live in Watts to know intimately about police brutality. I lived on the east side, in the projects, and it was a daily ritual to see police prowl through the streets in my neighborhood, arresting Blacks and Chicanos and often brutalizing them. Walking home, I'd often see cops handcuffing young men, forcing them to the ground, and uttering racial slurs as they did so. I didn't have to live in Watts to know that ugly reality. One time, a friend who had the rare car gave me a ride home. The next day, she told me that after she dropped me off, she was pulled over by the police. She was able to prove that the car was hers and that she was on her way home. The officer told her that she should never come back to this neighborhood because it was too dangerous. All of these experiences and attitudes collided in the first week of March of 1968, when thousands of Lincoln, Garfield, Roosevelt, Belmont, and Wilson high school students walked out of class, demanding improvements in the schools. We presented a list of demands to the Los Angeles Unified School District School Board. We called for relevant courses, including courses in Chicano studies. We called for an end to corporal punishment. We demanded an end to overcrowded classrooms. We demanded counselors who would pave the way to a college education instead of being relegated to homemaking and auto mechanics. But overall, we called for a change in the way we were treated. We didn't want to be treated like cattle. We wanted to be treated as human beings with intellectual potential. The walkouts began a slow and steady process of reform. Things did not change overnight, but a process of change had begun. A change in consciousness had begun and continues to this day. Because of what was set in motion in the year immediately following the walkouts, more Chicanos were admitted to college. And gradually, a change in attitude took place. Chicano students were treated with more respect than they had been. A shift in attitude occurred. It's a process that's still underway. Like many students of that era, I went on to college. I became a professional educator, and I hope that I have helped make a difference as so many of my peers from that era have. But there's still so much to do. In 1968, Lincoln High School teacher Sal Castro was regarded as a poisonous agitator. A few years before his death, the Los Angeles School Board commended him as a hero and a positive force for change, and actually named a middle school after him. And this year, LAUSD awarded teachers from the 5 schools that led the walkouts the Sal Castro Award. The criteria for the award was that these teachers had to have demonstrated that they were teaching their students how to be change agents, just as Mr. Castro did. But of course, his award was getting fired. But quite a change of attitude. But dropout rates among Chicanos remain unacceptably high. Currently, the school board and the school system in general is working hard to improve the graduation rates among Chicanos. Things have changed for the better, but these changes can only be characterized as glacial in nature. Yet such changes are cause for hope and optimism. And of course, the HBO movie Walkout highlighted the core activities of the walkouts. It did effectively capture the spirit and emotion of the achievements that the blowouts represented. And the book Blowout, co-authored by Mario Garcia and Sal Castro, is a solid recounting of the events of those days. I remember having conversations with Sal not long after the movie was aired and we were sudden celebrities. He would remind me that we and others involved in the walkouts were generally regarded as misguided pariahs before that film was released. I remember that those of us who were directly involved in the walkouts held each other in high regard, as did our supporters. But the general community did not. The media criminalized us on a nightly basis. The Sean Hannity of 1968 was a news anchor by the name of George Putnam. He had a large local audience. He gave what he called one reporter's opinion, and every night he chastised us for what he called were acts of treason and communism. Attitudes changed after the film, and plaudits started coming our way. There can be no doubt that the activism of 1968, as reflected in the walkouts, played a vital and significant role in the raising of consciousness of the shortcomings of public schools in Chicano communities. It helped bring about significant positive change. In 1968, the rest of the world defined us as a bunch of poor Chicano kids from East L.A. who were destined to become the next generation of undereducated, cheap labor. But we knew we were better than that. And we knew we deserved more. Thank you.
It's only when you hear a testimonio from someone that was there that you really appreciate what occurred. Unfortunately, we do not have Sal Castro with us today, but I do recall it was a January in 1968 here at this university in Kirchhoff Hall on the 4th floor. UMass was having a meeting, and Sal Castro walked in with at least 3 high school students. And he said to the meeting of UMass university students, he's saying, this is what's going to happen. The high school students have planned it, and it's going to occur. We, of course, I think several of us, university students, Chicanos, highly educated already. We were sophomores. Well, our thinking was, oh yes, we'll do this. We'll plan it and we'll implement it, and it'll be, a big thing. No, he said, no. The high school students are going to do it. The high school students have planned it already. They've got it in the works. It's going to happen because of them. All I want you to do is come and help to monitor maybe, or maybe put yourselves between them and the police. We began to think twice. But there were some of us that were so much involved that we made names for ourselves in 1968. Moctesuma Esparza is one of them, one of the students from UCLA who was right in the middle of it. And that film that Paula is talking about, the HBO film from 2006, Walkout, would never have happened without Moctesuma Esparza. So, tomorrow you'll get to hear Moctesuma speak, and we'll also get to hear from another UCLA graduate, Susan Racho, who did the documentary in 1996 based upon all of the video that was taken at the walkouts in 1968 that was never shown on television because it showed an awful lot of police brutality in 1968, police in the high schools in 1968, never shown on television in 1968. But she was able to, Susan was, able to compile that into a documentary that was shown in 1996. So you'll see that tomorrow as well. Now we've got another group that's coming up here. And Charlotte and Come on up, Robin. Irna.
As soon as they start off,
You can start running that.
I'm gonna let them take their seat first. I'm gonna let them take their seat first, and then I'll start it.
Charlotte is going to speak first. Charlotte is not. Charlotte is not going to speak first.
It's in the other order.
In the other order, who's that? What's that order? Okay, come on up. Now, as you can tell, we've known each other for some time. And Mirna Brutti is going to speak first, and we're going to have a slideshow while it's going on, and this is dedicated to Sal Castro.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Myrna Brutti, and I am a proud student of Mr. Sal Castro. Mr. Sal Castro was my teacher, my mentor, when I was at Belmont High School in 1989. That's my graduating class. And I'm going to start with, I feel so privileged to be here and to have this opportunity. But when asked to speak about our great Mr. Sal Castro, my first challenge was, how do you begin? Where do you begin? Where do you begin to speak about someone who played such a critical role in your life? How can you accurately share the incredible impact he had, not only in your life, but also in the lives of countless others? So my hesitation comes from a place of sincere concern, because you want to do justice to his legacy. Mr. Castro is a person that I love dearly, and I owe a debt of gratitude. His vision, beliefs, and commitment to the education of Chicano youth inspired all of us who had the good fortune of meeting him. I stand here as a student of Mr. Sal Castro, and while I was not there in 1968, I am here because they were there in 1968. His work, Mr. Castro had this gift to make us believe that all was possible through hard work and determination. Sí se puede, claro que sí, was often heard through the hallways at Belmont High. You could hear those words even when he wasn't around. I can hear them now. They are engraved in our minds forever. Each day, he encouraged and demanded that you gave nothing but your best. Countless students experienced the man who cared enough to ask, "Mijo, mija, what are your dreams? What do you want to do?" This reminds me of a story walking down the hallways at Belmont High School. And he always had information for you, even if you didn't want it or requested it. And, he would walk around with applications and scholarships. And that particular day, he said, "Mija, you like to dance? Here's a scholarship. Fill it out and give it back to me." So I did as I was told, followed the directions, and handed it back. Later, I was invited to audition. And then after that, I was invited to attend with a full scholarship. So when I came back to the school and told him about this amazing story, he was very proud of me. I had to go, in that time, Belmont High School was on a multi-track system. So I went and spoke to the principal that day and said, I was invited to attend to this summer program. But for this to happen, you're going to have to change my track. The principal said, "Sorry, we're full. Have a nice day." I walked out of the office, and as I'm walking down, I'm walking into Mr. Sal Castro, and I explained to him what happened. So he immediately said, "Come with me," and I followed. We both walked back into the principal's office that day, and he told the principal, "You must congratulate this young lady. She has just earned this award, and you need to change her track." At that time, the principal had no choice but to not only congratulate me, but to change my track. So needless to say, I attended that summer program. And again, it's those moments that change your life and change the way you see things and help you become your own advocate. Mr. Castro inspired and motivated me every single day to become the leader and to serve the public. I promised myself early on, after meeting him, that I would follow in his footsteps and give back. I chose a career in education because of him. I knew that would be a logical path to fulfill my goal of supporting the next generation. After leaving college, I'd hoped that someday I would get the chance to return to Belmont and express my gratitude to him, which I did, and then became involved with the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference. Of all the things that I've learned from Mr. Sal Castro, and of all the things that are dear to me, one that will always stay with me is his commitment to give to us and teaching us our responsibility to give back to others. So of all the amazing lessons and teachings, taking responsibility to serve our community is the one lesson I cherish the most. Perhaps it is because I can't imagine my life, what would have been if he had not been there, if he had been left to chance. I had the ability to go to college and graduate. Mr. Castro knew it, and I don't know if I had figured it out on my own. What if he had not given back? Where would we be today? He instilled in me the hope and the ganas and the desire. He gave and asked to support each other in return. I love that he never spoke of hate or entitlement. His lessons were focused on learning about our past, our history, and the tools we need to change the future. He made it known to us that whatever rights or privileges were earned, they were earned by the labor of previous generations. Prominent Mexicans throughout history had helped to build our country, and it is up to us to honor the ancestors by continuing to support our community. I am one of those people who benefited from them. And as I think back and I think of my work with him and I think of all the things he did for us, I just can't never forget what he did and what he was to us. I wrote a letter to him. Unfortunately, I wrote this letter after he passed away, and I'd like to share this in memory of him and the love that I have for him. Dear Mr. Sal Castro, my teacher, my mentor, my hero, it's been over 30 years since I first met you. I met him in elementary school. Did I say that? No? Okay. Without hesitation, in the hallway moment, you charted the course of my journey and changed my life forever. You were, then, as you are now, an inspiration. There is no way to measure the impact you had in my life and the lives of so many others. Your commitment to your students had no bounds, and for that, I am eternally grateful. I'm grateful that from the first time I met you, you spoke of goals, dreams, human possibilities. With your guidance, your dreams became a reality. You had this beautiful ability to see the potential in all of your students, and you made it possible for them to see it too. Thank you for believing in me, even when I did not believe in myself. When I uttered, "I can't," you replied, "Why not?" And I said, "It's impossible." You responded with conviction, "No, it isn't." You never accepted excuses and always offer solutions, teaching us to become problem solvers. Thank you for teaching me to never accept mediocrity from myself or from others. I learned from you to love and respect myself and to value myself as a student and to do the same with others. Thank you for gracing my life with your presence, your wisdom, your guidance. Not a day goes by that I don't say or take action remembering your teachings. I hope you're proud of our accomplishments. To keep your mission alive, we will joyfully carry on the work. You instilled in me the commitment and obligation to serve others and taught me to have fun along the way. I remain committed to you and will continue to keep your legacy alive. It will be my life's work to ensure you and your work will never be forgotten or ignored. I promise to continue to follow in your footsteps and continue to make you proud. Most would be lucky if they are remembered by a handful of people. Mr. Castro, you have thousands that will remember you and honor your legacy. You were part of my journey, never letting me fend for myself. You took the time to listen and care. You were the heart, the strength, and the hand to push me forward. My only regret is that I did not share this with you before you left on your final voyage. So on behalf of every student who benefited from you and your relentless empowerment, I thank you. Thank you for your support, your love, your wisdom, your kindness. I love you with all my heart, and I don't take meeting you for granted. I am a graduate, an educator, a leader, a proud Mexicana, a grateful American. I am all of this because of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank goodness for the need to switch out the batteries. That moment was needed. So I'd like to thank Myrna for making me follow her. We'll take care of that later. So we're doing it in order. So Myrna's the young'un of the group. I was a proud student of Mr. Castro's Belmont High School graduating class of 1968. And 78. What did I say? 68. Oh, I wish. No, 78. 78. So 10 years after everything that we're talking about, the interesting thing, I'll lighten it up a little bit. Mr. Castro was that cool teacher. Whether you had him or not, he was your teacher on campus. He was at every event. He couldn't sponsor. He didn't sponsor any club. I didn't know that. It was because he was prohibited from doing that. But he was at every football game, every drill team competition. I was drill team captain. And in fact, the drill team came to represent today. Shout out to the swinging sweethearts in the back. Yes. And so Mr. Castro, I did actually have him for class, though, for U.S. history. His class was very different from everybody else's. I'm not sure by today's standards we could say he was a standards-based teacher. But we did learn a lot, and I've spoken about that other times. But one of the things that was pivotal for me was that we would get, in his class, it was really the first research paper I ever had to write. It was junior year. And he had a conference table outside of his classroom, and he would call us out one-on-one for what he called office hours. He was introducing that college concept to us. And so he had a list of topics, and he said, okay, mija, you're going to pick one of these topics on the list. You can choose whichever one you want, and the one you want is this one, and it's the 1968 blowouts. So that's Mr. Castro. He could get away with things nobody else could. And then I said, but I've never heard of that. And he says, that's the point. So he gave me Rudy Acuña's book, Occupied America, and he said, here, do your paper. So I went back into class and I looked up the index and I saw the blowouts, and right next to it, when I opened it, it was about a person who had the same name as my teacher. A little slow on the uptake, but that's the first time I had ever heard. And it was only 9 years before, because I was a junior at that time. So it recent past history at my high school. So Lincoln's demise with him was a benefit to us, because he got kicked out of Lincoln and put to Belmont. He was transferred to Belmont, and that's why I got to know him. My discussion is going to be a little bit more about his legacy and sort of a bit of an academic way. What happened out of that project is I got this gut-burning anger and frustration about what happened to the students in 1968. That was so messed up. And while reporting to him, we had to have progress checks with him. And I didn't realize he was helping me shape my thinking around the topic. He asked, so how do you feel about your education? well, I mean, I'm top dog. I'm drill team captain. What else is there? I'm it. And I already knew I wanted to be a teacher, and all that was said. I was going to Cal State LA. I was good. And he said, good, I'm glad. I love my school, my old Crown Hill. I love it. But he said, do you have relatives and friends who come here? Do they all have the same experience? And the truth was no. My cousins had come later from Mexico, and they were in the ESL building down on the end in the dark somewhere. And they didn't have any classes with me, and they did not love their school. And the other kids that I came from elementary and junior high with, who were still in high school, were not in my classes. So he kind of helped me to see that I had a little star over me. And you had to know Mr. Castro to know that he was brutally honest and ahead of his time, and not using the academic lingo, but he had the academic background foundation. But what he was saying is, if you look a certain way and you act a certain way, and you're identified as that exception, you have a particular path open to you, and everybody else does not. And that was a huge awakening for me. And he asked me, is that okay? Are you okay with the fact that you got the premium experience and everybody else did not? And no, I was not okay with that. And so I'll tell you that since then, I've gone on and I'll tell you 1978, 10 years later, when I was a senior then, I was still gurgling there. I was still in that terrible, this is not right, this is not right. And I looked at the demands of the students, and I organized them into 5 categories, though they listed them in a long list. But one was about leadership. They wanted leaders to be inspiring of all students equally, to open up every opportunity for students and not have that tracking system. And I realized that in 1978, we didn't have a tracking system. What we had was a tracking system. Did you catch the difference? It wasn't called that, but why were my cousins in a completely different path than what I was? Then they wanted discipline to be doled out fairly. You'll see in the movie tomorrow the kind of things students had to endure with regard to discipline. And no, we didn't have paddling, and no, we didn't have overt, in front of public humiliation, but we had over suspensions and over expulsions, and kids being pushed out of school before they had a chance to drop out. And a lot of them were the kids that are not there anymore, as I'm a high school senior who started elementary with me. Where'd they go? Then they asked for things like excellent instruction. And I had this one experience I'm going to confess to you. I had great teachers. I learned a lot from them. I was the student who sat in the front row. So if you had anything to teach, even if you thought you might want to teach somebody something, I was going to learn it. But for one reason, there was a conflict in my schedule one time, and they put me in another English class, one that was not with the group of students that I was with all along. And I remember looking around thinking, oh my goodness. And the teacher assigned a quiz and walked out of class. And everybody took out the notes and started cheating. And I had studied, and I thought, this is craziness. And then I lasted the next week. There was another quiz, but I had a lot of responsibilities as drill team captain. I think I mentioned that. And trying to be a good student and all. And so I said, I'm not going to study. And sure enough, the teacher assigned the quiz, walked out. Everyone took out their notes and cheated. And I'll tell you, the one time in my life I wasn't a perfect person, I took out my notes and cheated. Why are you laughing? I took out my notes and cheated too. And the class was a zoo. And I felt so badly about myself. I went down to the counselor and I cried and I said, you have to get me out of that class. What it was is that's the kind of class everyone else was having. I just never knew it because I wasn't in those classes. And so as far as instruction being worthy and excellent, what I experienced was not what everyone else was. And that was a demand of 1968, and here we are 10 years later, and it's the same situation. They demanded a cluster of requests or demands. They made several demands related to dignity and respect. just being spoken to in a certain way, and having equity, like when they, Paula told me they had gone to visit a school on the west side, and they went into the library and there were books in every language. And in our schools during 1968, they were punished for speaking Spanish, and there were no Spanish materials in the library at all. And so when I looked at, in 1978, the idea of dignity and respect, and I thought, well, you know, it can't be dignified and respectful to have all these kids. We had a class of 4,000, and with a 50% dropout rate at that time. Like, that is not okay. And then finally, they wanted access and opportunity, everybody to be able to be college-oriented. And I know that that wasn't the case in 1978, because I was the exception. And I started to resent the fact that, you know, some of us were the exceptions. Well, what is that about? When there are whole schools where the exception is the one who doesn't get set up to go to college. So I look at the optimistic side first, and I say, well, what happened since 1968 and even 1978? Well, there's 3 markers of success in high school: grad rate, dropout rate, and college going rate. And on all those markers, things have improved tremendously since 1968. I have some statistics. There's Roosevelt is in the house, yes, I saw that. So for Roosevelt, for example, the dropout rate in 1968 was 45%. Now it's 10%. That's no accident. Congratulations, LA Unified. That's awesome. And then graduation rate for Roosevelt and for all the East Side schools, graduation rate was between 40 and 50%, which is what it was in 1978 too. And now graduation rate at Roosevelt is closer to 78% and climbing. Go LA Unified. That's not by accident either. And then the percent of college eligible kids. So how many kids end up eligible to applying to a UCLA, for example, because they have the A to G requirements. The best estimate is that back then it was less than 1% of Chicano kids were eligible. And right now at Roosevelt, it's 50% of the kids graduate eligible to go straight to a 4-year. That's awesome. So that's great news by any account. There's lots of nuance there, but the big picture is there's definitely movement in the right direction. You know, Mr. Castro used to say, go to college and graduate. Go to college. In fact, he would say, no sean mensos. He used the P word, but we convinced him not to put it in writing. So, no sean mensos, go to college and graduate. And why always that tagline? You know, go to college, go to college. Everyone says that, but he'd say go to college and graduate. And we really didn't get that. So what I want to do is sort of peel back the wallpaper on this just for a minute. In 2010 or so, I co-authored a book with the subtitle of The Wallpaper Effect. And that's just the idea that all is not what it seems. That what you see on the surface, if you dig deep, there could be blemishes, there could be cracks. And so let's go through a few layers of this. Let's look at layer 1. So was success compared to what? LA Unified has made huge strides, and I would say largely on the back of the 68 rabble-rousing communistic activists, infiltrators, that graduation rate, 100% graduation rate is the goal, and they're making movement toward that. Also, they aligned all of their courses to A to G requirements. So there are no classes you can take that are not A to G. So you don't have the biology over here and then life science, that fake class that doesn't give you credit. So that's sort of gone. So that's all amazing. The problem, though, is you say, well, 50% about of LA Unified kids are graduating university eligible, and that's awesome. And that surpasses the state average. State average is about 38 for Chicano kids. So that's awesome. But it's every other kid. So you can think about a kindergarten classroom and you can say, you have a gold star on your over your head, you don't. You have a gold star and you don't. So the first layer is to say, the glass is half full, but it's also exactly half empty. And that's not okay. So we don't want to normalize that. I think one of the greatest legacies of the 68 walkouts was that it stopped the normalization of cuckoo. The idea that some could and some couldn't was not good enough. A second layer is the college-going patterns. So what's interesting about this is, well, we have made movements. Half of the kids in LA Unified, 38 compared to less than 1%, are graduating university eligible. The percentage of people by ethnicity that actually get a BA degree is, you express your emotions about this. For Asian people, it's 53% of our Asian brothers and sisters have a BA. 42% for whites. For African Americans, it's 23. Do you want to take a guess for Chicano Latinos? 12-ish, depending on what source you cite. That is not good. So how can it be? And that Mr. Castro would say, go to college and graduate. And how can it be that 50% of kids, or 38 in the state, graduate university eligible, but 12% of Latinos are getting a BA? What is that about? And so what here it is. We do, in my work, what I do is go in and I study schools and districts where there are historically struggling students and try and uncover the systemic barriers to success. And so this recent set of studies that we did, we found among all the kids who were university eligible upon graduation, so let's say it was 50% of the kids. So out of the 300 kids, or let's say out of the 1,000 kids that were university eligible in these schools, 70% of them attended as a freshman after high school a community college, not a 4-year. But they were 4-year eligible. Do you see? And so there, I remember one time, Mr. Castro, I would argue with him and I'd say, Mr. Castro, why are we doing Chicano Youth Leadership Conference? Shout out to all CYLC, which is a conference that has been mentioned many times today that Mr. Castro would do every year. It's still going on, where mostly juniors in LA schools go to Camp Hess Kramer and they get the cultural pride and the historical contributions, understanding, and college brainwashing. That's what it is. How to get in and how to get out. So let's just say it. How to get in and how to get out. And I remember asking Mr. Castro, why don't we go to middle school? Let's start earlier. Let's catch them. Or let's start in 4th grade. And you know what he said? I won't tell you how he said it because I'm a well-bred young lady. But what he said was, you don't understand that even for our students, and you know we're all his students, even if you are university eligible, you don't automatically go to a 4-year. And these data now in my work just confirm that. We don't get the same socialization, the same information network, the same, we just don't get the stuff that's required. There's a vast divide between having the right classes, getting the right grades and the SAT scores, and then even just applying. And then even if you apply, to have whatever it takes to make the decision to go, there's like these huge obstacles that other kids don't have. And so what he was saying is, let's first save the ones that are right here, that are ready, but they're gonna fall off the vine. And not until I got into my professional life, following his charge, that I realized he's absolutely right about that. He once got into a fight. He was at CYLC, and one of the politicians who didn't claim to be Latino, but his parents were from Mexico. I don't know how that works. But he came with his, Mr. Castro was telling him, blah, 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 go to college and graduate. And he started to say, yes, I believe in education. And I went to a community college and then, I transferred and that's the route. Why don't we encourage all kids to go to community college? Well, Mr. Castro was impolite. So much so that I asked him to please leave and I would have an academic discussion with the gentleman because he was never going to give us money for the conference again if he got so insulted. But Mr. Castro's idea was this. The community colleges are working so hard to try to increase their transfer rates and support, and they're amazing equity champions all over there. But it's, as an institution, it's not working yet for the majority of kids. It ends up being a 13th grade. And it also ends up being a way that the high schools can say that everybody went to college. What percentage of your students upon graduation go to college? 92. Well, 20% of them go to a 4-year, 70% of them go to a 2-year, and then a year later, the dropout rate is huge. So what he was trying to say is, no, the best chance our kids have is to go to a 4-year straight out. And he was right about that. And I just think, wow, his little side conversations were the little jabs. I want to say they're little strokes. No, but they were more like, what do you call that? Yeah, he shanked us. That's what he did. Because what? And then later on, as you grow and grow and grow, you think, oh my God, that's what he was talking about. He wasn't a teacher that would just tell you straight up. He would ask you questions and then have you leave and think, oh man, I just got smacked. I didn't realize that. So in the end, they're so much better now than before. But you know how you've heard, what would so-and-so say? I'll leave that blank. So I'm going to ask, what would Mr. Castro say if he were here right now? Some of which, again, wouldn't be acceptable in public discourse. But this is what he would say. He would say, and I'm hearing him, so I want to do this, and I want to say, then I can't, but he would say, ladies and gentlemen, sure, we have to continue to fight, be equity warriors, be vigilant for unintended consequences. Every kind of movement for better always has the unintended consequences. Check the data, check the data, check the data. Make sure we're going in the right direction. Help the K-12s improve, because getting out's not good enough. You have to get out competitive. When we go to CYLC, we tell the kids, if you get an A on a paper, don't say thank you to your teacher. Go there and ask for feedback. Say why. Why did I get an A? And how could I make it better? Don't accept mediocrity. Don't normalize mediocrity. So he would say, in the K-12s, get it together, keep on fighting. He'd say to the university higher ed system, get it together. We have to improve the transfer rate. And they're restructuring the community colleges. I have hope that that's going to so improve. We have to have more kids who go into a 4-year, graduate and all that. But what he would say more than anything is, we don't have time to wait for that. While we're doing that, meanwhile, go directly to the kids. Have faith in the students. Look at what they did in 1968. So through efforts like CYLC, just arm kids with information. Show them how to do this. Don't assume they know things. I have a student that I mentor, and her biggest, she was told she wasn't college material at her high school because she didn't take enough AP classes. I got a doctorate from Stanford. I never took one AP class. I don't understand. So she was reticent. Once she got into Cal State LA, she's getting all A's. She's a 4.0 freshman year. And you know what her hardest problem has been? 2. One is, how am I not going to get lost on this campus getting myself to classes? So we took a field trip and we went from class to class. And secondly, what do? They didn't give me my books the first day. First time she ever had to buy books at a bookstore. The things we don't think about. So just arm the kids with information. They're brilliant, beautiful, strong, vibrant kids. Give them their pride in their culture, pride in their contributions, our contributions to this country. Make them stand tall, and then give them the information, and they'll thrive. Meanwhile, those of us who are still here will keep the good fight up from the K to the university system. So may we all, my beloved community, take up Mr. Castro's baton and continue to be equity warriors, fighting the good fight until. Thank you.
Here's a little something. March 6th through 8th, 1968, the weather was like this, and kids walked out. And I also want to say, who knew that the name Sal Castro would be a password to get to parking? I'd like to introduce to you number one son, Gil Castro. And his lady, Emily Scheid. I'm Charlotte Lerchenmuller. As the program says, Charlotte Lerchenmuller Castro. For 45 years, Sal Castro was a constant in my life and I in his. He said that I was his lifelong partner and his best friend. We were married. Some of you may know Sal Castro from the Walkouts, or from the movie Walkout, or from this conference, or as a Chicano civil rights leader, or as a teacher, or fill in the blank. I want to set the stage with several stories about Sal that I hope will give you a wider picture of Sal. I work in my 8th career for the Administrators Union of Los Angeles Unified, and one of the people I was working with was a gentleman named Paul. After Sal died, Paul called me up and said, "Charlotte, I didn't know that you were married to Sal Castro. He was my coach at Bellevue Recreation Center." Sal was the coach of the All-Star flag football team, and Gil, I don't think they used black flag play in this game. They went to play at Poinsettia and got beat badly. When they got back to Bellevue, Paul said that Sal could see that he and another guy on the team were really taking the loss hard. Sal took them into the coach's office and sat them down. And he said, "I've got 2 questions. Did you play your hardest?" "Yes, Coach Castro." "Did you do your best?" "Yes, Coach Castro." "Boys, that's all you can do. Play your hardest, do your best. I'm proud of you." Pretty good way to go through life. I was doing a presentation at CABE, that's the California Association of Bilingual Educators, after Sal died, and they were giving him a posthumous award. The former president of CABE came up to tell me that when she was driving to work, and she was something or other in the Ventura County Education, board, she heard that the funeral was going on, so instead of going to work, she came to Sal's funeral. And she was remembering that her mother had heard Sal speak, and her mother heard Sal say to the parents, "Ask your children if they've taken the SAT." First thing Mom did was come home and ask her, "Have you taken your SAT?" "No." "Well, you're going to because Sal Castro told you to." She went on, and she's, like I said, now a teacher, and she had her master's in education. I'm sure she's got a doctorate. But more importantly, there were 4 other students in that, or kids in that family, who all then took their SATs and went to college. Just because Mom had heard Sal Castro say, "Ask your kid if they had taken the SAT." I was at Calvary Cemetery before Mother's Day, and this is several years ago. Don't ever go to a cemetery on Mother's Day. And there was putting some flowers on Sal's grave, and a gentleman came up and he says, "Oh, is this for your mother?" I said, "No, it's my husband." "Sal Castro, he was my teacher. Wait here." And he went to his car. This is, good God, this has got to be like 2014. He goes to his car and he gets one of Sal's business cards that he had put in plastic. 1999, 12 years later, he still had it. March 6th through 8th were dates in 1968, and only one aspect of this man. There were 34 years before and 45 years after 1968. Yes, March 6th through 8th were and are pivotal and important. But there are some other aspects of Sal Castro that I would like you to know. In the movie, It is as if they all lived happily ever after. Let me choose that. There was no thank you, Sal, on the steps of City Hall while he was dressed in his tuxedo. After 3 days in jail, it was Charlotte and Sal driving off in my 1965 VW Bug. The East L.A. 13 was known as Salvatore Castro et al. Couldn't even get his name right. He was under felony indictment until 1972, when the state appellate court threw out the case under the United States Constitution, First Amendment of freedom of speech and redress of grievances. He was moved from school to school for 3 years. The state of California tried to take his teaching credential away. He lost his job at 10th Street Playground. Principals and administrators were always harassing him. Alleged colleagues would have nothing to do with him. They never gave him the time of day. Fellow teachers spoke negatively about him to other students. The IRS audited him several times. Phone was tapped. He was followed. And in spite of all of this, he did his work as a teacher, counselor, coach, Chicano civil rights leader. Here's some other aspects of Sal. As a father, 2 sons, Gil and Jimmy. They were 11 and 8 years old at the time of the walkouts and saw their father vilified in the media, especially George Putnam on Channel 11. He was a grandfather, 2 grandsons, James and Michael, both of whom are now in college. As a student, I missed something here. As a son, his father, Salvador Castro, was from Mazatlan, Sonora. His mother, Carmen Burrell, was from Nogales, Sonora. They met here in the United States, and Sal was born on Hubbard Street in East Los Angeles. As a brother, his brother Tony is 13 years younger and now lives in Arizona. An uncle, 1 niece, 2 nephews, although my nieces and nephews would say there were 5 nieces and 3 nephews. As a student, he began his schooling in Mazatlan as his father had been deported during the Mexican repatriation in 1935 done by the United States government. He went to Belvedere Elementary in East L.A., Rowan Avenue in East L.A., St. Thomas over in the Pico Union area after his mother married his stepfather, Cathedral High School, Los Angeles City, and a graduate, 1961, L.A. State as a Diablo. As a veteran, he was drafted into the Army in 1953, served during the Korean War from 1953 to 1955, and trained as a paratrooper. As an employee, hard worker, he started working in his stepfather's shoe shop at the age of 14. He worked at the Swede Blouse Company in the shipping department, at a rabbit slaughterhouse. He sold shoes in Bullock's downtown basement. He was a delivery man for Bullock's Wilshire, a busboy at the Sheraton Townhouse, park director, Echo Park, Toberman Playgrounds, youth services director, Solano Avenue and 10th Street Schools. All of this while going to college. As a teacher, he started at Washington Junior High in Pasadena in 1961. He was at Belmont High twice, Lincoln, Eagle Rock, Gardena, North Hollywood, Belmont back again, 1972 to 2003. And all of this without a gun. A music lover, Macintosh equipment, JBL speakers, open reel recording, cassette recording, CDs. He had a wide variety of taste in music, but always jazz, Cal Jader, and mariachi first. Lots of 45s, 78s, LPs, CDs. He loved to record. His music collection is being cataloged by my niece and will be transcribed as part of the Sal Castro collection here at the Chicano Studies Resource Center. He was a sports enthusiast, coached both of his sons at Bellevue Playground. Basketball, they were always the Bulls. Flag football, always the Chiefs. Baseball, the Yankees. He coached playground teams at 10th Street, Solano, Toberman, Echo Park. He coached his grandsons. He supervised football games while at Belmont. He served as the athletic director at Lincoln High, timed the track meets at Belmont. Big USC football fan. As a kid, he sold the Herald Examiner at the Coliseum before the games. Jim Hardy, the USC quarterback, brought him in to see the game. From then on, he was an SC fan, but he also liked the style of football John McKay played. We had season tickets, and we would tailgate before each game. On the Interscholastic Athletic Committee for Los Angeles Unified, he had the reputation for always being for the kids. He was a politically involved citizen and active community member. MAPA, Mexican American Political Association, AME, Association of Mexican American Educators, which he was a founding member, a field rep for state senators, Danielson and Roberti. He was on the Democratic Central Committee, Viva Kennedy campaign, co-chair, Pierre Salinger senatorial campaign, Young Democrats at LA State, worked on the Sunset Free Clinic board as a board member, Bellevue Recreation Center Gymnasium Construction Committee, ICANN, Interagency Committee Against Abuse and Neglect. And I heard today that tomorrow is the marathon, and every marathon would be out there 6 o'clock giving water to the participants. He was a commissioner on the LA County Parks and Recreation, served on the parent councils at Marshall High. He called himself a yellow dog Democrat. Vote for a yellow dog before a Republican. As a speaker, he was sought to present at colleges, universities throughout the United States. Yale, Princeton, Notre Dame, University of Kentucky, UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Riverside, UC Santa Cruz, San Francisco State University, UC San Diego, most of all of the Cal States, and various community colleges. He was a regular at the CLYLP conference in Sacramento and the IEFL conference in Idlewild. He discovered the PowerPoint the last year of his speaking engagements. He had a spiel that was informative, humorous, and inspirational. Over the years, he became the Johnny Appleseed of Chicanismo. Once you heard him speak, you never forgot him. He had the ability to speak to a room full of people, and I'm told that you felt that he was speaking directly to you and no one else. As a historian, World War II expert, he lived through it as a kid. He studied it as an adult. You could ask him anything about the D-Day invasion. He also knew about the early Mexican influences in the United States. He was an early California history expert, early Los Angeles history expert, and a Chicano history expert. His speeches were like a history on Americans with Spanish surnames. He had a book outline that he wanted to write. He made history. He was a historian who made history. Mario Garcia, in his eulogy, called Sal an American hero. He was a religious man. Our Lady of Guadalupe was his personal little brown lady. He always wore her medal around his neck. He was a true believer, always carried a rosary, as he had been educated by the Christian brothers at Cathedral. During his 7-month illness, he would ask me to say the rosary with him when he needed some peace, sometimes several times a day. His belief system, he fought for access and equity. Education was his constant theme. He looked to developing leadership. Last year, I received an email addressed to him from 2 professors at Claremont Graduate School who were doing a study on the daily lives of people tackling serious social problems. He did that, and it was never about him. His legacy. This is my job for the rest of my life through the Sal Castro Foundation. We're keeping his legacy alive and moving forward. Our focus is to support the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference. There is a rock that he always wanted to be placed in Hazard Park, honoring and memorializing Los Niños Héroes of 1968. These are just some aspects about Sal, not a complete picture at all. He was only receiving some of the respect that he was due in recent years. This year, there is the Sal Castro Award named for him, a school named after him, a book about him, a conference at UCSB named for him, several documentaries about him, numerous articles on his exploits, a celebration of the 1968 East L.A. walkouts at the March 6th Board of Education meeting, many 50th celebrations throughout the Los Angeles area and the Southwest, including here at UCLA. He went from pariah to hero in only 50 years. 8 years ago, I interviewed Sal for the NPR StoryCorps series when it came to East L.A. I asked him how he wanted to be remembered, as he had been called an activist, a reformer, a leader. He said that he was a teacher, and I am a proud American who wants our country to live up to its promise of equality, liberty, and justice for all. He said that he was at his proudest when former students would tell him, "Castro, I did what you told us to do. I went to college and became a teacher." Sal was a teacher, but he taught more than United States history and government. He taught pride, fairness, dignity, and motivation. In commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Walkouts, let's remember Sal's beliefs, which are the beliefs of the Sal Castro Foundation. Equitable access to a quality education is a fundamental right. Cultural pride and knowledge of your own history leads to respect of self and others. Education is the great equalizer. Education transforms the quality of life for an entire family and community. Education carries with it the responsibility to serve the community. You should notice how many times education is mentioned in the beliefs. Sal Castro and educational justice are one in the same. We all know that he was bigger than life, a legend, and a true American hero. Remember that you have the responsibility to follow the Sal Castro motto of no sean mensos, go to college and graduate. He was the best thing that ever happened to thousands of Chicano kids and to me. Thank you.